Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz here with Chris Ruffalo this week to go over your college football schedule for the Week 11 card. Chris, happy to have you with me today. Mitch is going to be back next week. He obviously does a lot behind the scenes and he's in a meeting this week, but I'm really excited for this college football card. Not necessarily the best card in terms of entertainment value. We do see a lot of blowout type spreads, double digit spreads, but what do you think about the card?
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to be with you, but we've talked about this in the last couple weeks where it hasn't necessarily had five, six headliner games. We've had a couple, and the cards have been fantastic. They've been great. We've seen a lot of upsets, a lot of competitive football. So I'm ready to break it down with you. A lot of good matchups this week.
Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Week 11. First up, we head to Columbus as Purdue takes on Ohio State. This one, 12 p.m. Eastern on Fox. This is the first game. I mentioned in the intro, a lot of double-digit spreads. This one we see Ohio State 37.5-point favorite. Chris, what do you think about this one?
This is the kind of game where the Ruffalo was born, but I'm gonna go with Ohio State here. I know they haven't necessarily covered this kind of number this season, but Purdue allowing 47 points per game on the road this season. This team's just looking dead in the water. I think maybe next week would be the look ahead spot for Ohio State with Indiana on deck and a big game for the college football playoff positioning. But I see no way to back Purdue here. It's ugly, but I'm going to lay it with Ohio State.
Yeah, I got to agree. And it's not a great spot because Ohio State is coming off the big win over Penn State, maybe a little bit of a letdown, but still, like you mentioned, 47 points per game given up on the road. The offense not really much better either. And I just think this is like you mentioned, Ohio State has not been the best in this big favorite role, but in recent years they have. And we know Ryan Day, he plays four quarters. He doesn't take his foot off the pedal. So I think Ohio State wins this game and does enough to cover the number by a 40-plus point win. Next up, we'll go to the ACC as Miami takes on Georgia Tech. This one's an interesting game because, of course, Miami is still undefeated, ranked in the top five in the AP polls. However, this was a game that last year really hurt Miami. It was the many people called it one of the worst coaching decisions we've seen in the last decade in college football. Not taking the knee, and Georgia Tech ended up winning that game in upset fashion. I think Miami gets its revenge though in this game, and I'm willing to lay the points. I laid the points with Miami last week against Duke. It was not an easy one, but they got there. This goes to show you how good this Miami offense is. The defense, it might be a little dicey when we get to the college football playoff, but against these ACC opponents and against Georgia Tech, I think Miami's offense rolls, and they do enough to win this game by 2+ touchdowns. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, if Haynes King was healthy for Georgia Tech for this game, I would be inclined to take a shot on the Yellow Jackets. But with it being, either Zach Pyron or Aaron Philo, it's Miami for me here. I just don't think that Georgia Tech's gonna be able to keep up here. It just feels like one of those games where one or two, maybe three and outs for Georgia, or a turnover, or just a punt, where Miami takes it the other way and scores and starts to pull away is going to be the difference. So I'm with you. I think Miami wins this one by two scores.
Next up, we'll go to the SEC as Florida takes on Texas. Another early game. This one, 12 p.m. Eastern on ABC. Texas, number 5 in the country with that 7-1 record. They are a big favorite in this one. The injury status of DJ Lagway will certainly play a role in this spread. But what do you think about this one, Chris?
Yeah, this is one that I agree. You're going to want to see if Lagway's playing, because if he's not, this one could get ugly, and the line will definitely move as a result. But I think on the surface, just catching 3 touchdowns plus the hook against Texas is where I want to be with Florida. I could see Florida just sneaking inside the number, because I think this is a game where the hook could come into play. We've seen Georgia be competitive against Georgia. We saw them, blow out Kentucky. They were competitive against Texas A&M for the most part. So I think that Florida could at least keep this one within the number. I'm going to take the points with the Gators.
Yeah, I'm going to go the other way. I just think, obviously the Longhorns are coming off a couple of lackluster showings, a loss against Georgia, barely beating Vanderbilt, but I still think they kind of picked their number offensively in this game. And I don't think, even if Lagway plays, I don't think Florida's going to be able to keep up for 4 quarters. They were competitive against Georgia. I mean, that was a very good game, but that's also a big time rivalry. You have to play the next week after that rivalry while the Longhorns have the advantage of rest being on the bye week. I think it's a good spot for Texas, and whether Lagway plays or not, I'm going to lay the points with the Longhorns. Next up, we'll stay in the SEC. This is one of the better games on the board. We got two ranked teams going at it. Number 2 Georgia, number 16 Ole Miss. This one 3:30 Eastern on ABC. Very short spread for this one. Georgia only a 2.5 point favorite. Total in the mid 50s. This is a tough game, and honestly, I see a few of these types of games that are tough. Alabama LSU is another one that I've kind of gone back and forth with, but in this matchup, I'm going to side with the home team. I really wasn't that impressed with Georgia in that win over Florida. And yes, I mentioned it's a big time rivalry game, so it's going to be more competitive than usual. But I still, the turnover issues that Georgia's had at times offensively, the defense not being as strong as we've seen, or as dominant, I should say, as recent Georgia teams. I think that's an issue now on the road. Ole Miss has kind of been forgotten because of those losses against Kentucky and LSU. People kind of throwing them aside, but they still could win out and certainly find themselves in the playoff. And this is a must-win situation for the Rebels. I like the fact that their offense put up 63 points and almost 700 yards against a decent Arkansas team. So I'm going to roll with the Rebels in this one plus the points. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take the under here. I think this is a game where, I think Ole Miss is going to get a little bit more resistance than what they got last week against Arkansas. Probably you could argue toughest defense that Ole Miss will have played this season. But like you said, I haven't necessarily been, all that impressed with Georgia offensively. Ole Miss, I think, has a fairly underrated defense that's been able to step up when if you take out the non-conference portion of their schedule, they've still held 3 of their 5 SEC opponents to 20 points or less. And like I said, we've seen Carson Beck be inefficient at times at quarterback for Georgia. So I'm going to go with the under 54.5 in Georgia Ole Miss.
Next up, we go to the Big Ten as Michigan takes on Indiana, the 9-0 undefeated Indiana Hoosiers. They're number 8 in the country now. Big favorite in this game. They've been a cash cow against the spread this season. I think we know where both of us will be in this one in terms of against the spread, but let's hear it, Chris.
I was going to say, if anybody's been watching these college football shows, you know where this is headed. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm on Psycho Sig. I'm going to take Kurt Signet. I'm going to take the Hoosiers. To begin with, just on the surface, I haven't been impressed with Michigan this season. They haven't been able to figure out their quarterback situation. The pass defense is susceptible, and Curtis Rourke being back, I think is going to be big for Indiana. The Hoosiers, we keep talking about how they're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and they just keep finding ways to deliver. And I think that Indiana does it again here at home. I'm going to take Indiana. Go ahead, lay it on me, Ron.
I got to go the other way. I got to take the points here with Michigan. Indiana's hurt me this season, that's for sure. And this was actually the funny part is going into the year, I was really big on Indiana. I backed them big against UCLA, and then they just got a little bit too overrated or hyped up, I should say, as the season's gone along. And now I think they're just overvalued. Give them credit for the blowout win over Michigan State, but Michigan's a very solid defensive team. They were somehow, a garbage time touchdown away from covering as a 14-point dog. You don't see that too often in that last game against Oregon, but they were competitive in that game at least, and their offensive line's held up a lot better recently. No sacks given up the last 2 games. I think they'll be able to run the football here and play good enough defense to cover this very large spread. And I mean, if this game was played week 1 of the season, Michigan might be the favorite, honestly, but now you're getting 14 points. I got to go with the Wolverines plus the points. Next up, we go to the Big 12 as Iowa State takes on Kansas. Iowa State, of course, trying to redeem itself after its first loss of the season in a very exciting game against Texas Tech, 23-22, the final score there. But we see them as just a 3-point favorite in this game. And Kansas, obviously, 2-6, not the record we expected the Jayhawks to have at this point in the season. But I think this is the best 2-6 team in the country. And we've seen them recently play a lot better football. I mean, we saw the big win against Houston, which looks a lot better now after what we've seen Houston do recently. And they were competitive against their rivals in Kansas State. I really like the fact that this is a very strong Kansas offensive line. They run the football very well, about 6 yards per carry this season, over 200 rushing yards per game. For a team at home, a home dog getting a field goal now, and a team that can run the football as well as Kansas, that's usually what I look for in these home dogs. So, yes, the defense has been tough to watch at times. Yes, Daniels has certainly not been as good as we expected. But I think Kansas catches Iowa State at the right time. I'm going to take the points with the Jayhawks in this one. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to go the other way, just in a lean right now, because the way I look at it is I don't believe that teams just blindly just look at the standings and say, oh, this is one we have to win. But I think that Iowa State controls their own destiny in terms of making it to the Big 12 title game. They don't play Colorado. So if this team can win out and take advantage of their winnable spots, that loss last week may not hurt them as much as, we believe right now. If Kansas pulls off the upset, I wouldn't be surprised if they, caught Iowa State in a little bit of a letdown after the big loss last week. But I think Iowa State bounces back here. They are 3-0 on the road this season. They've taken out some decent teams, and like I said, I just haven't been all that impressed with Kansas on the whole this season. So I'm going to lean towards Iowa State here.
Next up, another 3:30 Eastern start time game between Clemson and Virginia Tech. Another team looking to redeem itself after another loss. It was their second loss of the season for the Tigers to Louisville, 33-21. Virginia Tech had some expectations going into the year. They lose that game against Vanderbilt, and it was seen as a big-time upset loss. Oh, a season-ending loss. Now look at Vandy and how well they've done this year. But what do you think about this game, Chris?
Yeah, I was almost inclined to take the points with Virginia Tech, but now it's under a touchdown. I want at least 7.5 with Virginia Tech if I was going to take the Hokies. I think I'm just going to shift towards the over here. We've seen Virginia Tech hang around with teams with high-powered offenses. They hung around with Miami earlier this season, almost beat Miami outright as 17.5-point dogs. I think this is a good bounce-back spot for Clemson's offense. It's the Clemson team that entering that game against Louisville was putting up 40-plus points like it was going out of style. So I think it's going to be a higher scoring game. I'm going to go with the over Clemson, Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I'm going to take the points here with the Hokies. I mentioned, Clemson, we know that their offense has been unbelievable this season, but the defense nowhere near as dominant as we're used to seeing. And we saw that against Louisville. 8 yards a carry given up, no sacks in that game, 210 rushing yards, 19 first downs, and giving up those 33 points in the loss. And I think Clemson, for the most part, benefited from a pretty weak strength of schedule in the ACC. I mean, they played Virginia, Wake Forest, Florida State, Stanford, NC State. No, none of those teams really that competitive this season. App State non-conference play. So for me, on the road against the Hokies team that you mentioned has been competitive in these step-up games, and they've lost all their games this season by one score. They were all close games, especially that Miami game, which you could argue they deserve to win. I think the Hokies have certainly enough talent to be able to cover the spread and potentially pull off another upset win. Next up, we see Colorado and Texas Tech in the Big 12, 4 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Colorado now ranked 21st in the country. They're the favorite on the road in this one. We know the Red Raiders are coming off a big-time upset win over Iowa State at 23-22 final we mentioned. This is honestly, in my opinion, one of the tougher games on the board, both the spread and the total. I think I lean towards the under, honestly, in this game, even though you don't really think of too many unders with Texas Tech with that defense this year, but it really stepped up when it needed it most in that game against Iowa State, holding a pretty good Cyclones offense to 22 points. And I would say also, Colorado going into the year, the defense was a big-time question mark. I think it's been better than expected, and they've been able to get some good pressure on the opposing quarterbacks this year, earning sacks on 9.4% of their opponents' passing plays. So I'm going to go with the under here in a lean, but not my favorite game betting-wise. Should be a fun game to watch. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, for all the people in the comments that watch these videos and call us Colorado haters, here you go. I'm taking Colorado. I'm laying the points. Just because I've seen Texas Tech at home, and Ron's right. They get sacks on opposing quarterbacks. And if you've seen this Colorado offensive line, you've seen Shedeur Sanders get picked up off the turf plenty of times this season. But what I'm seeing is the 8th ranked passing offense of the Colorado Buffaloes against the 133rd ranked pass defense of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. I think it's one of those games where you're going to see multiple explosive plays of 40-plus yards from this Colorado offense. I think they're going to be able to move the ball at will on Texas Tech as long as the pocket holds up. Texas Tech, their last 2 home games, they gave up 59 and 41 in conference home games. So I got to go with Colorado here, laying the 3.5.
Next up, we go to Nashville as Vanderbilt, the 24th ranked Commodores, who have clinched their spot in a bowl game this year, will take on South Carolina, who just pulled off a big-time blowout upset win over Texas A&M. This should be a fun one in the SEC. What do you think about this one, Chris?
2 words, Diego Pavia. And even better, death taxes and Diego Pavia is an underdog, the sure things in life. I'm going to go with Vanderbilt here. I just think it's a bit of a hangover spot for South Carolina after the big win over Texas A&M at home, going out on the road. Like I said, whenever you were catching Diego Pavia as an underdog, I'm not going to bet against it, right or wrong. He just keeps finding ways to get the job done. This Vanderbilt team for me is legit, and I think they get the job done again, but I'll take the points to be safe.
And I got to go the other way. You know this one. It's been Vanderbilt and Indiana for me that have caused me fits, but I got to go against the Commodores. You could definitely say it's a letdown spot for South Carolina because that was a big win. Obviously, I think they stormed the field in that one, 44-20 over A&M. But you could also say the same thing for Vanderbilt, which, took down Auburn. We know that there's past history there between those teams, or especially Pavia against Auburn. So For me, I just think South Carolina is the better team defensively, especially, and even offense. I mean, I was really surprised to see how well the Gamecocks played offensively against one of the better defenses in the country. 530 yards. They didn't take a single sack, which is a big win for an offensive line that struggled all year. They ran the ball at will. If this South Carolina team can replicate that the rest of the season, they are a very big problem in the SEC. They don't really play too many, big time games the rest of the year. They do have the game at Clemson in the rivalry. That would be a nice upset win. But I think South Carolina is just too much in this one. Should be another great game to watch. Give me South Carolina. In our next game, we go to Eugene as the number one undefeated Oregon Ducks take on Maryland in a Big Ten battle. This one's 7 p.m. Eastern on the Big Ten Network. Oregon, another big favorite in this spot, minus 25 right now. Totals at 57.5 points. For me, I think the Ducks are a tad overvalued in this game. And we mentioned that the last couple of weeks they've been able, or not really the Illinois game, but against Michigan, the garbage time touchdown pushed them over for covering the spread in that one, and it was a brutal loss for me as a Michigan bettor. It was Michigan had the ball in the red zone. I think it was at the 15-yard line. If they score a touchdown there, they're going to cover for sure. They end up with no points. Oregon goes the entire length of the field and puts up the touchdown on the final play of the game to find that cover. Give them credit, and congratulations to all the Ducks backers, but I do think now at this spread, it's just too much against the Maryland offense that's potent. I mean, the defense is tough to watch at times, but strong enough offense, especially in the passing game. I think they can put up enough touchdowns to cover this giant spread. But what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take the over in this one. You look at Maryland this season, they've had two conference road games against Indiana and Minnesota, have given up a combined 90 points. So I definitely think that Oregon's going to be able to do some damage here. But keep in mind also in that game against Indiana, an undefeated Indiana team that we were just talking about, they also put up 28 points. They put up 23 against a decent Minnesota defense. So I think that Maryland can chip in enough to get us up and over this total. 57.5 does feel a little bit high, given that Oregon's been solid defensively at home for the better part of the season. But I still think we get up and over this number. I'm going to take the over here.
Next up, we'll go back to the SEC as Tennessee hosts Mississippi State. This one's 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Another big spread in this game as the Vols are laying 24 points. They are the number 7 team in the country. And this is a game where Mississippi State, they played UMass. They covered the spread in that last game, 45-20, but didn't have a great start in that one and gave up 335 yards and 25 first downs against the UMass offense. And it's been a really rough season for the UMass offense. So that's a concern for me. We know that the Bulldogs have struggled defensively overall. They've honestly been one of the weaker defenses in FBS football this year. I just think Tennessee, this is a team at the beginning of the season really beat up on its non-conference foes and defenses that were struggling like Chattanooga, NC State, Kent State. They kind of struggled in the beginning of their SEC conference offensively. This is a spot where they face a weak defense. There's no excuses for anything other than a blowout win, in my opinion. So I'll lay the points with the Vols. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take a shot on Mississippi State and the points. I think the Mississippi State's offense has improved in the last 3 games. The rushing offense has improved, the passing offense has improved, and we've seen Mississippi State as a double-digit dog in conference play cover spreads of 21, 33, and 37 against 3 teams that are also in the mix for the college football playoff in A&M, Georgia, and Texas. Tennessee, there's been times this season where they got caught playing with their food. They lost outright to Arkansas. They narrowly beat Florida. They couldn't cover as a double-digit favorite against Kentucky, who I still have as the worst team in the SEC. So I'm going to go Mississippi State in the points. I think that the Bulldogs keep within 21 here, 38-17. So give me the Bulldogs and the points.
Next up, a big-time SEC rivalry. This one, Alabama and LSU, battle of ranked teams in this game. Plenty of playoff implications in this matchup. We got two lost teams in this one. 7:30 Eastern on ABC. Alabama's a 3-point favorite. This is a tough game, in my opinion. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, it is a tough one for sure. But I'm thinking I want to be on the side catching the points. So give me LSU here. I like what I've seen from Garrett Nussmeier. I wasn't a believer earlier this season, but he's started to grow on me a little bit here, and he can air it out on this Alabama secondary that has been very suspect at times this season. I do think Alabama's going to get their points. I think it's going to be a game where both sides are going to trade score for score here, but I think in the end, I think it's going to come down to maybe a late field goal. Could be a 1, maybe 2-point game. So I'm going to go with LSU plus the points in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to lean that way as well. And really the key for me is, can LSU get that ground game going again? their run game has not been the best, in recent games. And but the thing for me, why I like their matchup is Alabama. When we've seen them struggle, when we look at their two losses against Tennessee and Vandy, both of those teams ran the ball very well in those games. Vandy was more of a methodical approach. They ran it 54 times in that game. Not so many yards per carry, but 166 rushing yards by the end of that one. Tennessee, it was over 200 rushing yards, 5 yards a carry, just a dominant showing there. And I think if LSU, we know that they have a great passing offense, like you mentioned, but if they can really get that two-dimensional approach offensively, I don't think Alabama finds enough stops to win this game. So I'll take the points here with LSU. Next up, we see Florida State and Notre Dame. I think we expected this to be a much more exciting game in the preseason when we looked at this matchup on the schedule. But alas, Florida State's 1-8 now this season. Notre Dame is 7-1, ranked 10th in the country. They definitely have some playoff aspirations still, but the Seminoles looking to pull together at least one upset win by the end of the year. They've got plenty of chances, and we've seen them already have some chances and not really come close. Is this one of the games that they get a sniff of it? I think so. I think Florida State covers the number at least. I don't think they're going to pull off the win. I don't think their offense is good enough, but I do think their defense is good enough to keep this game low. I mean, look at the total at 42.5 points and the spread at 26 points. For me, there's not a lot of wiggle room there for Notre Dame. And I think Notre Dame we know this is a program that's always been solid defensively, but I don't think the offense has enough firepower to put enough points on the board against a Florida State team. I said is good defensively, also special teams wise, one of the best teams in that conference in the ACC. So it's been tough to back Florida State recently. I've taken them a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. It's not gone well, but I'll take another chance here with Florida State plus the points. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I wouldn't know what that pain's like because I haven't backed Florida State much of anything this season, but I can tell you I'm not going to know what it's like here. I'm taking Notre Dame. What's that saying? If you have three quarterbacks, you don't have one quarterback. I don't even know if any of those three are even quarterbacks to begin with. Florida State's been brutal this season. Notre Dame, this is a massive number. And like you said, in conjunction with that total, there's pretty much no margin for anything different other than either Notre Dame blowout win or if Florida sneaks in the back door. But I'm going to go with Notre Dame here. I think it's more likely that they blow out Florida State. We've seen Florida State need a garbage time touchdown to sneak in the back door, getting 23 against Miami. They just got blown out by North Carolina. They needed, some help to get by Clemson. So I'm going to go with Notre Dame here, laying the big number.
Next up, we see Washington and Penn State. This one's going to be 8 p.m. Eastern on Peacock, and we see Penn State now a 13-point favorite coming off their first loss of the season in that rivalry game with Ohio State. And this is a big game, obviously. Washington's last year national championship runner-up. This season, they lost a lot of the production from last year, so the expectations weren't as high. 5-4 record, but man, this team feels like a much better team in that 5-4 record, and I think this is going to be a competitive game. But what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I really wanted a way to get onto Washington here, but I looked at it. I'm like, wait a minute, it's James Franklin. Is it Ohio State on the other side? No. Okay, we're good here. I'll take Penn State. I'll lay the points. I'm not going to run to the window to bet it because I have it at 2 touchdowns. Before the line even came out. Washington, their 3 road games this season have averaged 17 points per game. I think this is a bounce back spot. I think Penn State needs to take this game seriously if they're going to want to avenge that loss and sort of make up for it to the playoff committee. So I'm going to take Penn State here. I'm going to lay the points.
I got to take Washington. I mentioned I think they're better than their record, and when you look at their numbers on the road, I mean they haven't played too many road games, but yes, they're only scoring 17 points per game. They're giving up 31 points per game, so those look pretty scary. But 411 yards per game on the road, 5 yards per carry on the ground, 70% completion percentage. So really, it just tells me they're moving the ball well. They're struggling to punch in the end zone, or they're struggling in the red zone. But defensively, you can make the same argument. They give up 283 yards per game at home defensively, just 313 on the road. So yes, the points per game looks scary, but honestly, I think Washington's been one of the more unlucky teams in college football this season. Last week, ironic enough, they win that game against USC, but it was also the first game this year that Washington was outgained, as they had outgained every single opponent on their schedule up until that game. Of course, they win that one 26-21, but I think Penn State's a little bit overrated still, and I think Washington's severely underrated. So I'm going to take the points here with the Huskies on the road. And the final game we're going to talk about for the Week 11 card in college football, it's going to be BYU and Utah, another undefeated team in this matchup another team that's been a thorn in my side this season in BYU. This one's 10:15 Eastern on ESPN. BYU is the 4-point favorite. I love Utah in this spot, and I've said that against BYU a few times this season. I cashed it with Oklahoma State at least. It hasn't been a complete goose egg like Indiana, but I just think Utah, yes, it's been a disappointing season, but this is a very strong defensive program with a great home field advantage. This is a big time rivalry game. So I just think that this is, in a season where Utah's looking to end that 4-game losing streak, look for that signature win. If this is your spot to do it, you have a chance to put BYU out of the playoff standings, at least for now. BYU can certainly find themselves back in it if they can take down Kansas, Arizona State, and Houston. But I think this is the first loss of the season for BYU. Give me the points with the Utes. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I've been disappointed by Utah and the fact that we can't even play the Cam Rising game with chicken anymore. So I'm going to go with BYU here. I get it. It just doesn't. BYU just when it came into the season didn't profile like a team that would be sitting at 8-0 at this point in the year. I mean, how they were catching 12 and a half at SMU earlier this season. So I just think that BYU, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Utah has just shown me nothing in recent weeks. And while I do agree that coming into the season, I thought Rice Eccles was one of the toughest road environments for any team in college football to go into go in and try to win at. We've seen Arizona do it. We've seen TCU do it. And I think BYU can do it as well, even if they win by a touchdown. We're not being asked to lay too much here. So I'm going to lay the points at BYU.
And that's it. Those are the games for Week 11 in college football. Thank you again, Chris, for joining me this week. You can check out Pick Dawgz Premium for our best bets in college football, the NBA, the NHL for Chris especially. He's a big hockey guy, and make sure you watch the wraparound each day. But also college basketball has started, and we know the volume of college hoops is there. Can't wait for these non-conference tournament games. Early season, you tread a little bit lightly, but as we get some data, we definitely hammer that hard. But anything else you want to say, Chris?
Check out the wraparound. Check out the bank shot breakdown. Ron started great start to the season. I think it was 4-1. So I definitely want to take in all this content that you can on our YouTube channel. It's there for you guys for free. But like Ron said, this is the time to hop on long term at Pick Dawgz Premium. This is where you get the most bang for your buck with those long term passes. So definitely make sure you check those out.
All righty, guys. Good luck, and we'll see you next time. This is Ron and Chris out.